Oh look, national limit. Let's give it a dose. Yes. Touching the... Oh, that was a big one! Hey guys, Jimmy here and welcome back to the Skyline. It has been a long time since I've driven this thing on camera and I'm glad to finally be back in it. I've really been enjoying recently just being out in the cars more. It's made a nice change from sort of sitting indoors all day trying to think of content when, you know, I've had this car for nearly a year and a half now. I've not really made many videos on it, so I thought let's do that today. And if you guys are enjoying this content in the cars, then I very much appreciate you tapping that like button, tapping that sub button, and leave me a comment below letting me know what I can do better. I know I'm still quite new to doing these types of videos and they aren't perfect yet, but I feel that they're a lot better than they used to be, which is definitely progress. So if you're new to the channel, this is my Nissan Skyline R32 Gtr V-Spec in glorious TH1, a very rare colour. I think it's one of 141 or something like that. It's one of those stats you pull out when you want people to be impressed, but no one actually gives a shit. And I'm really hoping the B-roll I have of this car is of the clean car, because I've not really cleaned it recently because I don't have much time to come and drive this, usually anyway. So when I do, I just drive it. I don't worry about it being clean or not. So yeah, sorry. The car as it stands right now does have a couple of modifications to it. Engine itself though, the RB26, completely stock. Nothing's been opened in the engine at all, completely as it came out of the factory. Apart from a new cam angle sensor, which I had to install recently because I was getting a misfire above 6,500 RPM. And I only found that out when we took it to the dyno. That's how much I don't read this thing. But it does have an HKS intake. It also has new HKS twin turbos because the stock ceramic turbos are terrifying. And whilst before it had a Mines tuned factory ECU, it now has a completely new Link ECU. I'll tell you why I upgraded to that very shortly. Exterior does have the Nismo body kit, which gives that nice wide stance. Some RPF ones, which I think are probably one of the best wheels ever made. They go with just everything. And on the interior, we have a personal steering wheel and a Robson leather interior. Oh look, national limit. Let's give it a dose. Oh man, did you guys hear the pop? I heard the pop. So as you probably guessed, it's running a little bit more than the stock horsepower, but only a little bit more. I like to think of this, as the car is now, as sort of stock plus. So with those new turbos and the stock fuel rail, we are running different injectors though. We're making, I think it was 384 horsepower on the dyno, so not an earth-shattering amount, but you kind of forget with how cars are nowadays, you know, 500, 600 horsepower is up the norm. But this is bloody fast for a road car. I think we sort of forget sometimes how much 400 horsepower is in a car on the road, especially with the way this thing delivers power. It's intoxicating. It really is. It's a bit late in the day at the moment because I sort of overslept, as I always tend to do, because it's technically my day off, but I thought, well, it's a nice day of the day, I'll go out on the Skyline and make a video about it because I don't really talk about it that much. Speaking of mods, right now an engine is actually being built for this car, for the big boy build. Yeah, the RB26 will become an RB28 with a stage 0 stroker kit from HKS, which of course boils it out to 2.8 litres. We'll have the same turbos as well, but all the innards, all the internals of the engine are being replaced. Pretty much everything you can think of is being replaced to put up with a bit more boost, of course. And I made a full video on that before, so I won't go over all of it, but I'll put the link below in the description if you want to sort of check it out. With the goal of hitting about 600 horsepower, which I think is more than doable. But now the sort of spec sheet is out the way, let me talk about what this car is like to own, because that's sort of the point of the video really. As I try and mention in most videos, I'm very aware that owning a Skyline is quite a unique and quite a privileged thing to do. Not everyone gets to do this, so I wanted really to sort of talk about what it's like to drive, because not a lot of people even have the pleasure of doing that, getting in behind the wheel of one of these things. So first of all, if you're a JDM fan, right, everything you imagine about this car is pretty much true. One of the things I've always maintained when driving this is it feels like when you're driving at low speed and you're not getting on it or doing anything stupid, anything like that, it feels like it could be a modern car with just how smooth it is. The engine is so smooth in this, even with the modifications. I've got a bit of a chance to get on it now from second gear, wait for it to get past this bump. So foot down second gear, wait for the boost. There it is! Oh man! This is one of those cars that feels like it's a bit too quick to be on the road sometimes. It doesn't really wake up until you're right high in the RPM, and by then you're carrying a little bit of speed, you know. But by God, like, the noise and the sound, it just takes you straight back to, you know, Gran Turismo, watching the Fast and Furious Skyline. It's not that I'm really a fan of that franchise, but for a lot of people, that's why these cars are popular as well. And immediately, as soon as you gun it, as soon as you're on the throttle, you get that, there's like an anticipation, because you're not on the boost yet, it's winding up, and then suddenly it hits you, and suddenly you're there on a Japanese highway, you're there as part of the Midnight Club. And then you realise that you're going through a rural village in England that serve cream teas on Sundays. Of course, this car is modified, so it's a bit quicker than it is stock, but I've driven the car with what I think is stock power, and you still get that sensation. Stock boost in this thing, I think, is 0.7 bar on the normal turbos. Nowadays, we're running about 1.2, 1.3 bar with these turbos. This car on a UK road has proper presence, because there's not really many cars that the UK made that look like this or feel like this. First of all, it's pretty wide. It's not as wide as a GTR is, but with that body kit as well, it just looks imposing when you drive down the street. And for me, driving this car, for me, is the king of the road. And I don't mean that in sort of a weird, like, my car's better than yours way, but anyone who knows what this car is, you can see when you drive past, it turns heads. People look at it. People want an opportunity to be close to what this thing is, which is a 90s icon. So when I bought it, I was sort of saying to myself, like, it is my duty to share this car with as many people as possible, because the first time I got to see one of these cars up close was when I bought it. These things are hidden away. You don't see them unless you go to you know, various car shows, and even then, you know, you've got an owner looking at you, thinking about breaking your arm off if you even go near it. In terms of running costs, it's not so bad until you have to replace something. You know, fuel and oil and stuff like that, it's not awful, those things. I'm very lucky to have a lot of that supplied to me by the guys at HKS. They do some fantastic oil specifically for this RB26. For example, brakes. I had to get the brakes replaced fairly soon after I bought this car, and that was, I think, the best part of 900 quid, something like that. A lot of money, again, for someone who tries not to spend that much money, and then of course goes and buys cars that require you to spend money in them. Big brain Broadbent, well done, Jimmy. Fuel economy? Simple answer is I don't know. My fuel gauge doesn't really work, to be honest. But I wouldn't guess it's any more than 20, 25 miles to the gallon, really. And if you're boosting around, of course, that fuel just drops exponentially. So probably not an eco-friendly cruiser, this car, but of course it's never meant to be. Oh man, every time. I had the chance to go out with Steve the other day, Super GT. He actually put a video up on his channel of that recently. I'd go check it out if I were you. He came down in his M2 competition, and I said, well, I'll bring the Skyline out, let's go for a little sort of spirited drive, because I don't get to do it very often. And this thing pretty much held its own against the M2 in a straight line. And I know this car's been modified, but it still has less power than that M2 competition. I mean, I think that eventually that thing will start putting away, but that made my day, that did. Not because it was embarrassing Steve or anything, because I love that M2, I think it's fantastic, but because this 30-year-old Japanese waifu, you know, it just goes to show what this car has always been about, a strong base that you can build on and then challenge pretty much anything. You know, I've been sitting here for the last 5 minutes or so, retaking this bit over and over again, trying to think of something that I dislike about this car, something that I would change. And I am incredibly biased because I love this thing. It is my dream car. This car right here, of all the cars I could own outside of a brand, you know, outside of a GT40, this is the car that I always wanted to own, and to sit in it now and talk to you about it after owning it for a year and a half is very surreal. This car is just everything that I'd want from it, everything that I expected from it. The only downside, I think, is that the mirror there is a little bit creaky, and I'm having a little bit of the classic Skyline dash bubbling going on. Apart from that, there's nothing that I can really think that I don't like about this car. I suppose it wouldn't be my dream car otherwise. But similar with the GTR, I am terrified of leaving it anywhere. I cannot bring myself to leave it anywhere. I'm so paranoid about this thing. And that is, I guess, the downside to owning something like this, something that's sort of increasing in value and pretty rare here in the UK, is that you are paranoid about it. This car is a flashback to an era of prosperity. And it came from that era, the bubble in Japan, where everything was going fantastic. Only then could cars like this, you know, the Supra, the RX-7, only then could those cars exist. They couldn't exist now. There's no chance you can make a car like this and market it and people would buy it. Regulations have changed, needs have changed, wants have changed. And then, if anything, it just makes the experience of owning it all the more sweeter, because you know this would probably never happen again. And also, you can do this whenever you like. Fuck me, man. It almost makes me emotional to drive this car, because for me it is like the end goal of everything I ever tried to do when I was a kid. Here, embodied, it exists. Something that I never thought would be possible to own or even drive. Here I am talking about how I'm going to modify it and how much I've enjoyed owning it and all that thing. With the GTR, the modern GTR, I had regrets about buying it. With this one, I've had zero regrets ever. It's always been amazing to me. And I really hope that it stays that way. I'm sure it will. And if I have the chance to, again, like with the Impreza, like with the GTR, if I have the chance to share it with you, then I'm always going to do that, because everyone should get to experience this feeling of what it's like to drive a bit of Japanese history. How could anyone ever get tired of that? How? I don't know. I feel bad that Jan sold this. I really do. I'm sure you miss it, Jan. You can come drive it one day. Although there are a couple of things that are wrong with the car now. For example, the oil pressure gauge sort of doesn't work. It works sometimes, which is always scary. If you know there's any, or if you're a car guy and you see your oil pressure drop to 0, big panic. But that's part of the reason why I got the new ECU, also because of the build coming, but because it has sort of these safety measures built in that if oil pressure drops suddenly, it will just turn the car off and preserve the engine, which is exactly what I want. You know, I'm a car hypochondriac, so those sort of things there, really fantastic to have. Also, my fuel gauge doesn't work. I filled it up just before I started this video because it was, well, I thought it was on empty. And empty in this car, by the way, is like halfway below the empty gauge. It's very weird. But now it's showing me having about a third of a tank of fuel. So I don't really know how much fuel I have. I know there's some in it though, because we're still moving. The gearbox is the original gearbox, so it is old and starting to show its age a bit. The synchros are starting to wear out, which means that when I can and when I'm downshifting, I'll try and just match it into gear rather than just sort of a straight downshift, just to make sure it's going in a little bit easier and taking a little bit of wear off those synchros. I'm definitely going to look into sort of rebuilding some of the gears, I think. Probably first, second and third in this gearbox, because the alternative is to get an R34 gearbox, and they are like £8,000, I think. They're super expensive and quite rare as well, so I figured that it'd be better off just rebuilding this one and hoping for the best, keeping it 5-speed, you know, keeping that Skyline experience. But I find with a car like this, you just sort of drive around the faults. It's part of the car. It's not really a fault, it's just a characteristic. And that, again, is someone being maybe a little bit too infused with the car. God, how lucky am I, man? I'm sitting here right now making my third sort of real life video about cars. I sort of wonder sometimes what I've done to have deserve this sort of good fortune, you know. There's a lot of guilt to it as well. I'd say, speaking candidly, but I'm speaking to all you guys, I guess, but there is just a guilt to owning these cars. I feel like I should do something better with my time. But I don't know, part of me justifies it as sort of saying, well, you know, you're preserving these things, so maybe someone in the future can enjoy them the same way you have. Ow. I never want to stop driving this car whenever I take it out. I want to just drive forever. I want to just go on a massive road trip somewhere and drive and just be happy with it. So that video was a bit of a ramble. I didn't really have much of a plan going into it as to what I was going to say or what I was going to do, frankly. But I really hoped you enjoyed it. Sometimes I want to just share the passion that this car inspires in me, because I feel it's really easy to get cynical with cars, and people collect these cars. You know, I've come across people who have, you know, 10, 12 of these cars just sitting in a barn somewhere to appreciate, you know. And I guess that's a viable strategy, but What a shame that is. These cars should be out, they should be being shown to people. You should be enjoying them for what they are. The idea of keeping one of these cars stock, I said earlier, doesn't make any sense in my mind. That's not what this car is, or what it became. And if I have the opportunity ever to get out and drive this car and make content on it, then I really think I should be doing that. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this ramble. I'm really hoping when things get back to somewhat normal, we can do like a car meet or something. I know there's a lot of you guys out there who have your own really cool special cars, and I want to see them and hear their stories. So hopefully we can arrange something once COVID is novid. I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, hit that like button, subscribe again. Let me know in the comments what I can do better, if there's something particular you want to see. I'm having a hard time ending this video because there's more and more things that I want to say about it. I don't want to stop talking about it. But I am aware that like the video will eventually just evolve into the ravings of someone who loves something a bit too much. And maybe that's not what the video should be about.